I want to cover three stories today, each one having to do with child predation, but each one more troubling than the first. Not only is it troubling that it has the words child predation or words similar to that in each of these stories, but that the stories are so vague, so odd, so nondescript that we don't know what they really say. We don't know how bad the situation is. We don't even know, at least in two of the stories, whether any children were actually involved or rescued at all. One of the stories claims that they rescued three children, but again, it does not explain exactly what the police do. It doesn't release the names of the children, of course. And when you ask ICAC officers about the statistics, they never ever give it to you. Why is that, though? If they're rescuing real children, and there's so many that they've rescued, and that's their number one job, why is it that they never come clean with any of the statistics on this? They do have statistics, they're wildly conflated. It is difficult to make head or tails out of them because they conflate, as I've said before, many, many aspects. I'm going to cover that here today. So the first one is a story by a subscriber that comes out of Utah and has to do with uh, stati- um, the local station there in Utah. I won't necessarily list one. Refers to this particular individual as a predator. Okay, and I'm sorry, not the individual. There's several people involved with this sting that were predators. Okay, we learned that they were child predators almost immediately in this story. They immediately say attempting to exploit children. Okay, and then they go on to say, well, there's human trafficking involved. Okay, and then they go and they nuance it further and they say the sheriff says, well, some of these were young women who were being trafficked. So we go from children to human trafficking, which takes on a whole different connotation, to women being trafficked. Okay, and they said some of the women were as young as 14 and that they rescued three children. Okay, fine. Fine, that's fine. They rescued three children. It'd be nice if those names came out eventually, but we don't know that, right? And we don't know anything about ICAC's methods. We only know that, okay? We know that children were supposedly involved and that people were going to meet children. And we don't know any other details. And you might think, well, isn't that enough? Well, we don't know because what we do know is that ICAC sets people up. We do know that they post as adults and then they switch it at the last minute toward children to pretend to be children. We also know that they make up stories. They claim that the target was the first one to bring up sex, and the target directed the conversation, and the target focused on a great deal of sexual conversations and pictures and so forth. And we know that police sometimes post pictures, police sometimes bring up sex. In fact, frequently, increasingly, they're the first ones to bring up sex. So we don't know. Is this an entrapment case? Or were they really interested in exploiting children? And by the way, the children they rescued, we have found, and other journalists have found this too, sometimes the children they count as rescued were the children of the people who showed up supposedly to exploit a minor. So, in other words, they went to the house of the person and they found three children there of varying ages, and they said, aha, we rescued these children. So we don't know even anything about these children, if they were really rescued as a result of this sting, that they were really the targets of these men supposedly going forward. We don't know how many of these were human trafficking, how many of these were women, how many of these were supposedly the young people being exploited. We don't know. And what's worse is that the media is happy to conflate this. The very first part of the story, you'll recall, says that they were seeking to exploit children, okay, or words to that effect. Very first part. But yet you listen further, and even in the words of the sheriff, he says, most were, human trafficking. Some were women being trafficked, and wasn't all kids. Okay, well, how many were kids? How many were human trafficking victims? What does that mean? And how many were women? And what were they being trafficked? Were they prostitutes? What was going on with that? Because why wouldn't ICAC want you to know that? How are we going to look out for this and be able to protect children if we don't even know what's at stake? We don't even know what they're talking about. Well, the second story is even more odd. Second story and the third story on the ICAC, the Northern Virginia ICAC website. This one is a weird one that goes for 10 years. So it appears that in 2014, a man by the name of John Raff was arrested for supposedly sexually exploiting a minor. And just like the first story, he's referred to as a predator. They refer repeatedly to these people who have not been charged with the crime, who have not been convicted of a crime, as predators. Okay, hadn't been convicted yet, but they're called predators, prejudicing the mind of the listener. So this is a predator, right? He was released after a couple of days. He bonded out and he fled. He went to Egypt, where the article is very vague because he was arrested in Maryland in 2014, but it implies, or 2024, 10 years later, and it implies that all these organizations, including ICAC, Egyptian authorities, U.S. Marshals, Rockingham Police Department, Rockingham, Virginia. I don't know what they had to do with it. It's very unclear. The article never explains it. That they somehow got this guy to come back and they arrested him in Maryland. What it implies is that Egyptian authorities found him, arrested him, and extradited him. Okay, they did say he was extradited. They did not explain the reasons why he was extradited. Okay, and this story is even odder. It's out of Harrisonburg. So it's not clear why, but they're happy to say, quote, Raff was attempting to sexually solicit someone he believed to be a minor. Well, they say this in all these articles. These people were attempting to sexually solicit. We don't know that. They said it in my case. They said it in many other cases. We don't know that. Okay? The trolls are just apoplectic because they want to get all the chat logs, and of course they've been of mine, and of course they've been extremely irresponsible with the little they have gotten. I'll talk about that in a minute. But again, if you don't see the chat logs, and you don't know exactly what's going on. And even in the logs, the context is very important. You can't just read it. You have to understand what was the context, what was going on here. And of course, the police are not going to release context that is contrary to their point of view. So that makes it even harder to figure out what's going on in these cases. Of course, we're supposed to believe the police because, after all, they're police, and the prosecutors because, after all, they're the good guys. They're prosecuting, right? Of course, what about the defense of the potentially unwary innocent adult who is compromised by what the police did? He doesn't get a voice. He doesn't get, or she doesn't, as in the next story, get a voice. Okay? And when they are coming out after they've been incarcerated, they're banned from the social media platforms, even if they are allowed on the platform by, or not prohibited by law. They might be prohibited by the platform itself, as in with Nextdoor and Meta, etc. So and X. So you're prohibited from being on there. So you can never tell your story. You can never get it out there. How are you going to do that? If you're banned from social media, the number one place where you can get that message out. Okay, so this is a violation of your First Amendment rights. How is it that you can ever defend yourself or clear your name? Well, you can't, because with the word sex, they make sure that they destroy you, and you're supposed to go away. So that's why the trolls are angry with me on Fairfax Underground and other places where trolls hang out, because they just want me to go away, and I just won't do it. So that really makes them sad. And I'll talk about that here at the end. So the third story is kind of interesting. This has to do with Ashley Christen, Kristen. Don't know how to pronounce it. I'm saying Christen. This is in Spotsylvania County, which is about 30 miles south of where I'm sitting right now. It occurred in November 18th, 2024, and apparently a National Center for Missing and Exploited Children tip. In other words, somebody called in And this is about an online account where Ms. Christen was apparently uploading, storing, and potentially sharing, quote unquote, images of children. And the police reviewed the items, apparently without a warrant, and then got a warrant to enter the house and seized her devices. And she was arrested, and she got 5 production charges under 18.2-170.1 colon 1 a and 1B, I think it is, in the Virginia Code. Uh, Production and distribution of child pornography, and 1 charge of aggravated assault. I don't know if she assaulted them or where the aggravated assault came in. The article did not say, but it could have been against the police officers. They like to rack, pack, and stack charges in any event, and certainly they're very serious charges. Now, if she did that, she certainly should be punished. But of course, it brings up the warrant issue. How is it that they didn't have to get a warrant for looking at that online account? Because we don't know what actually happened. It would seem to me they could be covered if they had a warrant, and we don't know to what extent, when they have the devices, that those devices weren't tampered with. We have a case of a particular police officer, one of 3 I know, who actually was caught in a sting, and he is very concerned because they took items from his home that were totally without anything on them, and suddenly things are on those devices. And he wants to know, did they plant something? Because he was a police officer, he knows that this is exactly what they do. I have heard from 3 or 4 police officers who have told me repeatedly that planting evidence is commonplace. It's commonplace. They do it all the time. These are police officers telling me this, okay? Former police officers telling me that this is what they used to do. Either they did it, or they were involved with doing it, or they knew about it. Okay? So, again, more questions than we can possibly get. So, about the troll community, then. Okay? So, a friend of mine infiltrated, if you want to call it that, one of the troll communities called Fairfax Underground, and there the trolls are on there. And this goes loops back toward constitutional principles of why it is that the police, the prosecutors, the press want to suppress our First Amendment rights to be able to speak on these things and defend ourselves. Well, it makes sense during the trial that you can't speak, and your attorney has to speak for you. And very often, I suspect attorneys don't speak for them because A, they're preparing for the trial, but B, it's almost always a slam dunk for the prosecution. And the prosecution almost always has all the cards anyway. And there's likely going to be a plea deal, as there was with Mr. Raff, who pled guilty to, I think it was 3 charges. So if you plead guilty to 3 charges, very often you have a plea deal, right? Makes sense. And the plea deal, if you want to call it that, is we'll put you in prison for 100 years if you don't agree to plead for these and take 20 instead. Actually, Mr. Raff got 75 years in prison with all but 29 years suspended, 36 years of suspended. So he got 75 years. Now, the trolls were crowing about this and conflating it somehow with Me Too. And they were talking about how this was great. He should have gotten 75. Of course, he didn't get 75. He got 29 active. But in any event, they don't read more than the headline anyway. But here's the thing, we don't know anything about these cases. You think you know it, but you don't. And when you delve into it, you find that the police and the prosecution repeatedly leave important details out. So, what actually happened here? What actually happened in these cases? Were were they really uh, examples of predation? What actually happened? We don't know. Over and over again, and we have many questions. And why is it that the police don't want to answer them? We've reached out to them in many times across the country, in many ways across the country, through Citizens Against Government Entrapment, and other organizations working on issues like this, and they never ever answer the question. Well, we have invited them to be panelists and talk about various things, and and talk about their concerns, they never want to do that. And it's just really baffling why they don't want to do it. If in fact they want the public to be on board with it. And of course, the reason's obvious. I'm being tongue in cheek here. They don't have to. They don't need to do it. They have enough people on their side. The public pressure isn't so great. B, they don't want to reveal what they're really doing. Okay. They call it operational methods, and some of them are secret. And that's just not true because, well, it is true that they don't want to reveal it, but they're not top secret. They're very, very basic things that they're doing in order to get people's attention. And unfortunately, they get a lot of training about how to be deceptive, how to engage. And it's one thing if these are reactive stings, like with Ashley Kreitzen, okay? It's one thing when you have a tip, okay? It's another thing if you're trolling. And that's where we draw the line with it, okay? And that's where we say it is true that children are being exploited. It's also true that adults are being exploited too, in the name of public safety, weaponizing their power and authority under the Constitution, and using children as pawns and child safety as a pawn to justify ruining people's lives. Okay? And that's unfortunately what is happening. So, and then it gets into the public. We're going to protect the public. Well, a few weeks ago, I mentioned I was banned from Nextdoor on the flimsy pretext that I was a so-called rotten sex offender, and they had to defend against that. It is also a violation of their policy to harass and threaten, and yet I have all the screenshots of many, many people threatening me, telling me I should be dead, saying they're going to come by, or other related things that are a little bit more mild. So, I have those, and they were not interested in any of those. I repeatedly asked them why they didn't also penalize these other people, and they repeatedly ignored the comments. So, again, if you are blocked from these particular sites, then you don't have much recourse. So, I have a friend who went on Fairfax Underground, which is basically a garbage pit similar to some of the other social media accounts where people go on and they complain about whatever they want to. And usually they are ignorant and half informed. They don't have all the information. They're intelligent, but they choose to be prejudiced. They choose to be focused on one or two tiny little things that they exploit the hell out of. And they're also just plain mean. It's disgusting that in their attacks on me, for example, they attacked my daughter, okay, who is disabled. They attack me personally as well as professionally. They go into my divorce and they extrapolate and postulate and suppose that my divorce of some 8 or 9 years before had something to do with what happened to me later. They theorize that because the Supreme Court of the United States in my criminal case refused to take the course to the case, excuse me, that it was ruled against me when in fact they denied cert. They deny because they received thousands and thousands of cases and they only accept 1/2 of 1% of the cases. All right, 1/2 of 1%. Unless you're Trump or an important official, and then they'll take a lot of your garbage. Okay, but on very important constitutional cases, they very often have demurred, even as they have had many other cases dealing with entrapment, or not many, but in some important cases in the past on entrapment that they've taken, but not since about 1992 with the Jacobson case. So they're just nasty, these trolls. They're mean and they're nasty and they're cruel and they don't ever really pay attention to all the data. They, again, will ask you to put all the chats out there. But as I pointed out, look at how misleading these articles are to begin with, which is some of their sources. Look at how the chats can be sliced up and diced up. And as I've told them, if you are misleading with all these other comments that you're making about all these other people, if you are cherry picking information, you don't have a right to claim that I'm cherry picking information because one thing I am doing as I'm reading the chats. And yes, of course, I'm skipping through things that are irrelevant because in a conversation, other things get thrown in there that don't have anything to do with it. Okay. But if you want to come by, I've said, I'm happy to sit with you. We'll roll a camera and I will have a witness and we can look over everything and keep everybody honest in there. And then you'll have a chance to say whatever it is you want to say about it. But of course, not one of them, not one has taken me up on it. Okay. Because among other things, they would have to reveal their identity. They would have to come on camera. They would have to be honest, and they would have to say, "We want to know about this, and we're willing to, really give it an honest look." And they really don't want to do that, right? They want to name call, and they want to shame, and they want to point fingers. And what they really want you to do is go away sheepishly, so that they can wag their finger and feel good about themselves that they added more dirt and more shit onto you. That's all, and it's pretty pathetic, but that's what they do. So it's a great disservice that ICAC does to the press in reporting this incorrectly, which gets out into the public, most of which don't care. The ones who do, some of them have critical thinking skills and are willing to be open minded. Others are full of fear and apprehension. And then there are the trolls that add cruelty as the cherry on top. And where is the discussion of children? Where's the discussion on how best to protect children here? Where's the discussion on ICAC's methods so we can have an honest public debate about what really happens on these sites and what police really do? What do we really expect of police? Maybe we want them to do more of it, but why won't they have that conversation? Because they are the ones afraid of being exposed. They're the ones that don't want their methods known to the public because the public might have some questions about that. And the last thing the police want to do is have public scrutiny and what they believe is reserved as their private business. They're in the private business of pretending to protect children instead of actually protecting all of us in a democratic republic. And that's really the problem with all of these um, so-called records, as some will say, where you have a news article about something. If they start out using the same old line, this person was trying to look for children to have sex with, this child predator, police are trying to stop real predators, people who would try to exploit children. We don't know any of that, and they don't do any investigation of that. And because of that, we are left in the dark as to the real nature of child predation, how bad it is, whether it's getting better, what methods work, what don't, and we are flying blind as the public, fully reliant on the police, which is exactly what they want. This is Norman Michael Ation for ICAC Unpacked. Have a nice day.